for one person from the we're waiting for one person from the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority itself to join us. Uh, and I think that we'll give the crowd a minute or two longer to gather here. So just hold tight.
Kind of a somber bunch.
Say it's nice to see the people here that I know, and I'm looking forward to getting to know the people that I don't know.
Yeah, we're not that somber. Let's say, well, you looking forward to this too. Hi, everybody.
Certainly not a somber bunch, just nobody's been prompted to speak. That's I'm sure you won't be somber in a few minutes. But
I think we're just so used to holding our breath these days that we just need to breathe.
yeah, I've become quite adept at compartmentalization personally.
Yeah. So we're just in our little compartments, like waiting for the next thing to happen.
Yeah, like all the Supreme Court decisions we're hearing about today.
Oh, oh no.
Less said about that, the better. Um,
No kidding.
so uh, I've been waiting for Dan Bucks from the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority to join us. I think he's held up. I think it would be appropriate in that case for me to potentially. I see that Jess Peterson is here on the call. Jess, I'm so sorry, but I think I'm going to put you on the spot. My name is Abe Zumwalt. I'm an economist and planner for David Evans and Associates. I'm corralling much of this effort from the consultant team side, but I wanted to first have for everybody on the call given various levels of cognizance about who's sponsoring this effort. I thought it would be appropriate if the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority itself had a chance to kind of introduce itself. And Jess Peterson, I think, would be uh, an appropriate person to do that, so long as Dan Bucks is still we're still waiting on him to join. So just so we don't
Yeah.
hold ourselves up. Yeah.
Hey, you betcha, Abe. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity. It's a great group. Been in front of you a few times before, and really just want to hat tip to Abe and his team, his colleagues. They've just done an incredible job, and you're going to hear about that here uh, this afternoon. I think most everybody's Mountain Time Zone and beyond, unless we've got some Pacific Coast time folks in there. But in any case, we've made some progress. It's unique. You've already alluded to the world we're currently living in right now. But again, compliments to Abe and his colleagues. They've navigated that quite well, and then compliments too to our FRA colleagues that are there. They're doing their best. These are challenging times. I don't need to tell any of you if you're in a federal agency. So we're grateful for um, the role of FRA that's there and Abe's patience and kind of continuing uh, uh, we might juggle a little bit. I think we're in one of those rare situations where our project and the scoping and the commitments that we have actually made greater progress than on the Fed timeline. So because of, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, you're in a little bit of a hurry up and wait. So we'll get all the work done, we'll produce it, and FRA will say, "Hey, hold on a second there."
So,
Go ahead. Yeah,
Jess,
jump in, Abe. Yeah.
If you could just, I think it'd be really helpful if we could talk more about the structure of the authority itself.
Oh, I thought you
And
guys knew all this
yeah.
story. Okay, all right. I'll
No, it's
show.
okay. No,
I was
just in case
just
somebody on
doing
the
your.
call is
I
unaware, just
was
the structure of the authority and who it
trying
is
to
and what it's about. That's
give the preview to all the amazing. I just jumped right in the middle of it. Okay, well, I
well, you're
apologize.
excited, and that's okay. But yeah,
I am. This is exciting. These folks have been working on this stuff for years. Okay, well, I will get into not the boring stuff. I will get into the administrative and substantive stuff, as prompted by Abe. And then I assume Maggie or someone's reaching out to Dan Buck. So yeah, absolutely. So Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, we are the entity, the government entity that connects the old North Coast Hiawatha line, now the North the route connecting Chicago to Seattle, and of course Abe will go in all details there. So we have our member counties that have a board rep, and so we function in that entity of putting everything together. We operate on a host of levels, both from an improvement on the rail side. So if you look at passenger rail and freight rail, we've got some work going on right now on the Empire Builder up there at Malta, some track improvement. We've partnered with BNSF to get some funding there. That's kicking off, very exciting. So Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, we have the ability to contract as a government entity to do these projects, to do track improvement projects, to do the scoping and things of that nature. And so we're seeing work done up there. And of course, too, our goal is to connect the region from Chicago to Seattle. And so we've had good conversations everywhere from Wisconsin, North Dakota, on into Idaho and Washington. We also have some conversations with Penwar on some our friends in the Northwest on some partial delivery service, how to utilize rail for that. And sorry, I had another call come in there. Cut
no,
off.
that's all right. That's great, Jess. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
that's where we're at. Yeah. And so we look forward to giving you an update here today. And our meeting is coming up here early September. Go on our website, check it out. We'll be in Livingston. There will be some virtual components, so you can follow us. Some of you I know will be attending. So we'll have our annual conference here in Livingston, I believe September 8th. And again, a lot of information's on Big Sky Passenger Rail. So come on over and check it out. And just thank you for the time today. So I'll turn it back to Abe here.
That's great. Thank you, Jess. It's the authority is a very interesting and not unique, but individual entity, born from the grassroots in a chain of counties, utilizing a great law in the state of Montana that allows them to facilitate projects like this one. So, without further ado, I want to quickly introduce the team that is conducting the consultant work. I then want to talk about federal programs and the structure of the Corridor ID program and exactly what it is that we're working on now and exactly what it is that we hope to be working on in a few months. And then I want to dive into some considerations that we've already shared with the Federal Railroad Administration. And then finally, I'd like to have a more open-ended conversation about how advocates can advise, guide, and help support this effort. So that's the broad overview, but without further ado, I'll jump in. My presentation will probably last for about 25 minutes. That's what I'm aiming at here. And then hopefully we can reserve the rest of the time for what I imagine might be an animated discussion. Anything we don't get to, obviously, I'll personally follow up with. All questions that we asked today, and feel free to use the comment function here on Zoom to submit questions as they come to you during the presentation. Everything is going to be addressed. And I also think that in addition to establishing a regular cadence of such meetings so we can keep abreast of each other, I think it's also important that if there are key interested parties that we're missing today for this general briefing, I'm happy to follow up with them individually. I want to make that very clear up front. So anyway, Uh, like I said, my name is Abe Zumwalt, and I'm representing a pretty big team because this is a pretty big route. When you look at the general route of the North Coast Hiawatha, we're dealing with, 2,400 mile route, roughly equivalent to something of the scale of the Empire Builder. Unless you're a really massive consulting firm, nobody could do this under one roof. And so we teamed specifically with local entities across the span of the route to make it happen. So, of course, here in the Northwest, we're with David Evans and Associates, headquartered in Portland, even though I'm speaking to you, as you might gather from my background, from beautiful Tacoma, Washington. In the middle of the route, we have KLJ Engineering. They are really they have a fabulous track record with the authority and prior work, as well as a really individual approach to outreach, which is going to be central to this project. And then in the eastern end, we have Quandel Consultants, synonymous in the Midwest with passenger rail development. Overlaying, we have Steer doing a small part of the work as well. It's a big team with a deep reservoir of subject matter expertise, and we've really had to tap a lot of different people on this, given the unique nature and length of this route. So obviously, we're talking about a resurrection of what was formerly known as the North Coast Hiawatha, but let's talk about what this project actually is, right? Technically, this is categorized as a service restoration. It is most certainly a long distance route, statutorily defined at over 750 miles, which means that operating costs, once this service is established, will be a federal and not a state responsibility, which is crucial. Uh, Element of the strategy for especially some of the routes in the middle of some of the states in the middle of the route. But also because we're restoring something and not simply augmenting an existing Amtrak route, we're also taking the time to think about and employ the corridor identification process holistically, because this is an opportunity to reassess what a long distance train should look like. This is an opportunity to reassess the almost half-century old Amtrak model of a single train a day at best. This is also an opportunity to reassess sort of the capital limitations that have been imposed upon long-distance service models by the equipment choices that have been made, again, almost half a century ago. There's no reason to think more expansively about a diversity of markets that can be served by a train like this. Everything from making sure that the essential travel that the Empire Builder serves today, as well as incredible demand for sleeping car services that is evident in ticket prices on the Empire Builder today, and how that might be further delineated and extrapolated into being able to serve a broad marketplace. But going back to where we are in the overall program itself and to kind of settle into the discussion around actual federal programs that we're employing, I think it's useful to put this project in context. This is the official Federal Railroad Administration map of all 69 corridor ID projects as submitted, and you'll notice that this one it's the biggest one. It crosses the most number of state boundaries. There are two other Amtrak long distance routes, but those have a significant advantage in the sense that they already operate today. Those being the Cardinal from the Northeast Corridor over to Chicago via West Virginia, and the Sunset Limited through the southern part of the country along the Mexican border. This means that we're looking at a project of kind of a unique circumstance, given the scale. Again, I keep on coming back to that theme. I think a lot of you have probably seen this chart, but I really have trouble with it because I've looked at it so much and I've thought about it so much that I think it's important to delineate more what it means. This, of course, is a summation of the various federal programs that were employed in the most recent Surface Transportation Reauthorization, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, including the Corridor ID program over in the beginning stages, federal state partnership for the majority of it, and then, of course, restoration and enhancement for actual operation purposes. But let's talk about what this actually means, especially for this project, because corridor identification has three steps, right? And that makes it look like step one is systems planning, step two is project planning, and step three is project development, which is kind of true, but also in function, this is more what it looks like. Step one is the establishment of a statement of work for an SDP or a service development plan. That is what every state entity that applied for a corridor, all 69 corridors, basically were given a block amount, $500,000 to do just that. When we get into step two, that's the actual service development plan. That's more the interesting nuts and bolts work. That's where you have extensive outreach. That's really where big decisions are made. And that's also where the meat of the project happens. Step three is figuring out exactly how to establish the discrete number of capital projects that the service development plan it develops so the service can be established. I think it's really important to emphasize that we're in step one. So what does that actually look like? If you want to see what step one projects look like, there's a really useful document, and it's the statement of work framework that the Federal Railroad Administration developed. Previous to the present administration, I believe that there was a more expansive interpretation about how you would take this framework and then tailor it to an individual corridor. But right now, especially given the few projects of the 69 corridors that have actually been accepted into step two, you're seeing a lot of documents that look an awful lot like this one. It's easy to Google. It's Federal Railroad Administration Statement of Work Framework. And it's like a 30-page document, and you can look through it. And for instance, the corridor that just was most recently admitted into step two of the corridor identification program was Los Angeles to Phoenix. And no doubt, what got them in there is something that really cleaved to the language in this document. The document contains pretty open-ended contract language, and the FRA likes to keep it that way, just to make sure that when you're in the throes of the service development plan, you have options to tailor a project in the thick of things to the nature of a given corridor. There are some changes that you can negotiate with the FRA as you submit this during step one, and that's what we've been working on. But overall, this framework, it standardized expected work products, and they're really trying to come up with a conveyor belt to stamp out intercity passenger rail corridors across the country. That's what this is about, and that's also part of the reason why sometimes there are fewer changes to the stock FRA language than one might expect. So where are we? We took this document and we've subtracted some things and added some significant components to try to get them to get their arms around the fact that this is a long distance train. We've submitted it, and the FRA is presently in the review process. Given some staff shortages there and some other challenges, I believe some forthcoming revised policy documents for how they are to interpret this language, we've encountered some delays. Still, we're pretty certain that we'll have their approval of this, again, very open-ended document later on this year, which means that hopefully we'll be able to commence step two. And that's really the interesting part of this work, late this year, early next. So let's talk about the statement of work and what it means for Washington State, which goes back to how exactly this was applied for in the first place. When we secured this contract, the award had already been made to the authority, and the application looked like this. I'm drawing your attention to this map because this, again, is the official Federal Railroad Administration map of corridor ID projects. And most of these tend to cleave to a corridor. But if you notice what this one looks like in Washington State, I want you to find that rail line for me, because I'll tell you, maybe that's the flight path between Seattle and Spokane, but it sure isn't a train. And that's because it was not defined as to how the service would get from Spokane to the West Coast. This means that really we have to look at about 1,000 miles of railroad. One way you could look at this is, I know that there are preferences, right? People in Hood River would love to see more service to Wishroom. People in Wenatchee would love to see more service along the present Empire Builder line. There, of course, is an extremely worthwhile effort to establish passenger rail service to Ellensburg and Yakima via Stampede Pass. What we're going to do is we're going to look at all three. This is a big opportunity because right now the only insight we have into expanding passenger rail service east and west in Washington State is a very high level study that was completed by the Joint Transportation Committee in the teens. And that just gave us an idea about what it would take for Stampede Pass. But this is actually going to give us a much bigger arsenal to figure out exactly what that means. This also gives us the opportunity to figure out what exactly it would mean if we say, okay, so say the chosen route does in fact is in fact Stampede Pass. At the end of this, we'll also know what it would take to deal with the large amount of traffic that BNSF presently runs on the Fall Bridge subdivision down to Portland, the water level route, or along the present service of the Empire Builder through Wenatchee and Leavenworth. At the end of this process, we'll have a good idea after having worked with the railroad and the railroad operations analysis about what all three would look like. I really want to stress that we remember that right now, this two of these corridors are served in a rather unorthodox fashion. You know, the Empire Builder hits Spokane, it splits in two, and it goes both to Portland and Seattle. Because of this, one of the modifications we've made in the statement of work is an insurance that we are able to concurrently look at route and service options simultaneously. The FRA tends to like you to define your route and then figure out your service. But we don't think that's going to work here because the present service today violates that. Right now, we have one service option operating over two routes. So we have to do it all at once. And I think that the ultimate goal of this route may look different than its original operating segment. It's all to say that there is a big opportunity, I think, in this phase of the work and in Washington State, given the fact that we can learn a lot more about where presently it will take to upgrade any one of these corridors to increase Amtrak service or increase long distance train service. So
Question.
I want to move, please.
Hey, Abe. First of all, thank you for your work. I'm a Tri-Citian, uh, and there's a couple errors. Number one, the North Coast Limited was a Northern Pacific Railroad property and train, and it never operated between Spokane and Seattle on the Great Northern. The original North Coast Limited route was from Spokane, Pasco, Yakima, over Stampede, Auburn, and Seattle. I was horrified to see the North Coast Limited website show the preferred route as a duplication of service between Sandpoint and Seattle. So I want to clarify that. Also, the from a level of service perspective, between Spokane and Everett, other than Wenatchee, there's little population. Whereas the Tri-Cities and Yakima Valley are hundreds of thousands of people now, and that have no rail
And it's the
service at
fastest growing
all.
region in the state. Yeah. Hmm.
So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, you're okay. First of all, I think that it's important that you bring that up because there's a lot of intense feelings about this and they're not misplaced. This is not a replication. That railroad that you see there, it doesn't exist, right? This is not an implication of any one of these corridors. That's the point I'm trying to make. What it means is that we have to go through and we'll make the case for each one. And the fact that you have an immense, growing, and extremely diverse population in the in the southern part of the state, I think is extremely valuable, and that's going to be an input that feeds the analysis. I think that this is going to justify uh, this case more than you might think at the outset. But also, I think it'll reveal uh, some other capacity constraints. It's all to say that while this is not the same program as, say, the FRA long distance study, which did in fact choose Stampede Pass, this is one where it is going to come into heavy consideration with the other three routes. Oh, pardon me, with the other two routes. But we can get into that further, and I'll talk to you more because this is not the only uh, uh, interesting analysis that we have to contend with. So, and I'm also happy to return to the subject at the conclusion of this presentation. Just so,
Thank you.
Abe,
of
could
course,
I add a bit of perspective on this?
Dan, so good to see you. Glad you
Yes,
could.
my
Yeah,
apologies. My invite had come through at an hour later, and I'm joining early as far as my schedule was, but late for yours, and I apologize for that. I'm head of the Development and Strategic Engagement Committee uh, of the Big Sky Rail Authority. From our perspective, the uh, these route alternatives are ones that we would prefer, just in the abstract as an authority, that they all be served with as many frequencies as possible between both the Big Sky North Coast service and the Empire Builder. And we think there ultimately ought to be frequency improvements in the Empire Builder as well. So it's not a question of we come to this with the notion that they ought to all be served. There will be if choices have to be made, they will be made on the not on the basis of what the authority thinks is the right judgment, but on the basis of the input from the affected areas, the groups and citizens, yourselves from the affected areas, the results of cost benefit analysis, and then feasibility from the standpoint of the railroad's involvement. And the railroad is, and its perspective on these matters will become an important one for all of you to relate to and respond to. So we're the uh, there is there are strong cases to be made for service to all of these routes, and we know that we certainly understand the special concern about the route from the Tri-Cities to through Yakima and Auburn and Seattle, because that feels an awful lot like southern Montana and southern North Dakota that are growing and have needs and are mixtures of small and large communities that will thrive from rail. And so we certainly intuitively understand the case, and nobody has to convince us that there's a very good case to be made there. We would prefer that all of the routes be served with the maximum frequencies possible. And what Abe said earlier about considering service and routes together is very important. We think the frequency element here is very important. So you will shape this, so will the benefit cost analysis, and so will the railroad.
yeah,
Um,
that's well said, Dan. But also, I want to temper. So we have some soaring dreams there of frequency on every route, but I also want to temper that there is actually strategy involved in this approach as well. Normally in railroad negotiations, there are no alternatives. And if you look at negotiation strategy in most business, it comes down to having fallback alternatives. Normally especially a state-supported route, there is no alternate right of way. There's no fallback option. Here, we have an opportunity to actually have options to explore, which I think is actually going to be a real strength and point of resiliency, because that way there isn't that way you have options that can be staggered strategically when you're working with both the state and the host railroad. But I want to now move on to some general concepts that we provided in our gap analysis to the Federal Railroad Administration, so you can kind of gather more of the philosophy of how the service development plan, when we enter step two, is going to be conducted and some of the sensitivities we want to be especially aware of. One of the big things is the strength of a long distance train in the political makeup of the country. Given the statutory definition of a train longer than 750 miles, uh, we really think that for much of the country, it is perhaps the only option for seeing meaningful service expansion. We want that to be appreciated, especially given the new emphasis on rural communities. And we think that there's a real salient message there at the federal level, both in the previous administration and in this one as well. The overall corridor you see here, with all these options, this is actually quite pared down from what it could be. One of our members of our team actually ran the Northern Lights Express study. No, pardon me, it was a study between St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Chicago, looking at every conceivable universe of alternatives study, which they thought ultimately was a tremendous waste of time and money because they just went back to the alternative that they're running on now. So we wanted to really be realistic about this. As I talked about earlier, the nature of the application, and also the nature of how the purpose and need was initially drafted, talking about a restoration, forced us to look at the fact that the original North Coast Hiawatha, not the North Coast Limited, John, but the North Coast Hiawatha, as operated by Amtrak, used both the Empire Builder alternative through Wenatchee, as well as the Stampede Pass alternative through Yakima and Ellensburg. So both of them had to be on the table. But further to the east, you see some lines there going through Wilmar, another line unfamiliar to the Amtrak network going through Eau Claire, and an additional one going through Madison. And those all have to be on the list because those are concurrent corridor ID projects. So the state of Wisconsin is running all of those. The Wilmar alternative was one that the state of Minnesota had on a concurrent plan, looking at increased service to St. Cloud and Fargo. So those all had to go to the map as well. We're going to break those down into pieces because ultimately, you have these terminating cities and you have these intermediate stations, and how we serve them is a matter of question. But it's not going to be, again, a universe of alternatives. It's going to be a sequential process, right? So this way we can break it down. You have a first tranche where you determine an ultimate alignment through Montana. You have a process to really, oh, sorry about that. You have a process to look at the routes in the Pacific Northwest. And you have a process to work with the Wisconsin DOT on how exactly we navigate our way to Chicago. It's going to be sequential and not a universal plan because that way we have a timeline. There are other issues that we really wanted to bring forth because we raised some eyebrows given the fact that we are one of 3 long distance routes in a program that contemplates 69 new corridors. And one of the big questions there is talking about where is the characteristics of a long distance train? What does it serve? What does it do? Amazingly, when I conducted the gap analysis, I found out that most of the people in the FRA that we were working with had never seen these charts. This is data from Amtrak talking about what passengers would otherwise do where the train's not there. And what I love about these is I think that they're just, I love the variation between them, but the concurrent themes I think are remarkable because I think more people fly and take long distance trains than anybody would ever expect. Right? You're looking at a third of all Empire Builder passengers in Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota at the time of survey that were riding the train instead of taking a flight. Obviously, a lot of cars are moved from the road, but the other thing is the fact that you have a ton of passengers that are being induced to travel. Normally on highway modeling, you might have a couple percentage points for induced trips, but these are numbers that defy most planners' understanding about what mode introduction can do. And so you can't tell me that the 20% of passengers on the Empire Builder that wouldn't make the trip otherwise aren't meaningful. I mean, it's just amazing to think that that fifth of ridership, we're probably looking at essential medical trips, but we're also looking at probably a lot of tourism that wouldn't be happening otherwise. These are exciting sort of dynamics and things that we're explicitly wanting to capture in their updated purpose and need, as well as how to think about what success means in a service plan going forward. Another aspect of this is thinking about the general dynamics of long distance trains in the system. I want to bring forth the local example of Spokane, Washington, which I think is fascinating. In 2023, which wasn't a great year for ridership coming out of the pandemic. You had an average of about 125 passengers a day getting on the Empire Builder in Spokane. And even though the numbers don't break up this evenly, as I have it broken down on the slide, because of course the train splits in two, what's amazing is that at least heading eastbound, you have almost an entire Superliner coach getting on the train. And this is a train that comes between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning if it's operating on time. And these are options that probably, I mean, in most travel demand models, they just wouldn't exist. People wouldn't know about them. And yet, here we have a surprising success. So I think that the what we're seeing here is a couple of different factors at play. A long distance train has a unique number of uh, trip pair potential. You have a lot of trip pairs that are made potential on a 2,000-mile route, far more than you would on a typical intercity passenger rail corridor. And this is the secret to their strength. This is the reason why you have demand that might, fill a Superliner coach in the wee hours of the morning in Spokane, because you have people going to a vast array of different markets, and we want to make sure that this is reflected in our ridership model. Also, I think it's important. This gets back to reimagining how the service thinks about markets served. Looking back into precedents for this is difficult because we have essentially had Amtrak data with two classes of service forever. But when you really look into it, there are some interesting outliers. Uh, Early on, when Amtrak first took over private passenger rail service in the early 70s, some of the trains retained a lot of the character and service characteristics they did when under private flags. Uh, a case in point, the Southwest Chief, the former Super Chief, ran at 18 cars. And early on in the early 70s, it just about covered his operating expenses. The only analog to that presently in the long distance service is Amtrak's Auto Train. And everybody discounts that because you have to pay uh, an additional fare for your car to go on that train, which is a big source of its revenue. But not for nothing is the fact that it carries more than twice the number of sleeping cars than any other long distance train. And you can't tell me that also doesn't contribute to the fact that it covers its operations expense. And so I think if we're looking at a clean slate here, there's no way that you wouldn't want to provide what is ultimately an extremely diverse service model with far more options for accommodation than we contemplate today. So didn't want the whole of this presentation to be wrapped up in um, me sharing slides. I do want to talk about some next steps, where we're going to be and where we see some of this developing, and then I think we can refer to questions. I haven't looked at the comments field yet. I'm hoping that people are submitting them. But I just have a few more slides here to share, and then let's talk about next steps, open questions. Um, you can strangle me through the Zoom camera if you'd like to, but we can also figure out how to work together. We can kind of just talk about what's happening over the next few months. So right now, as I keep on emphasizing, we're in step 103. That means that out of this to FRA, we're going to be dealing with some contract language, actually quite a lot of contract language. We're going to be dealing with a budget and a potential schedule for what we think that the service development plan is going to take. Upon acceptance, we can enter step 2. Right now, the working number for what a service development plan is going to cost with a really massive outreach segment, a unique demand model, and quite extensive negotiations with the host railroads. And don't take this as a final number because the FRA hasn't accepted it yet, and it is subject to revision upon acceptance. But right now, it's looking like in the vicinity of about $11 million to facilitate all of this work. And in step 2, right now, as of present, there is a match requirement for that. So the FRA will cover 90% of the service development plan costs. So overall, that means a prospective match figure of around $1.1 million. There are various avenues to achieve this match, but as the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority is not synonymous with a DOT or another recipient of formula funds or any other kind of tax funding that we might considerably, we might more conventionally achieve this through, we're going to have to think creatively about how this is achieved. On a broader, more political level, uh, I think that this is of interest not necessarily at the state level. This is not going to be decided in Helena or Boise or Olympia or Salem. This is going to be decided in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned, the three major programs facilitating new passenger rail service today, corridor identification, federal-state partnership, restoration and enhancement, those are all under the rail title. And the rail title within the overall Surface Transportation Reauthorization expires next year. It's pre-funded, uh, but those conversations are happening in Washington, D.C. right now. The good news is that map I showed earlier that the FRA chose for the 69 corridors is really agnostic to political district, and it's quite diverse. There is a lot of bipartisan purple support for these programs. But the devil, as always, is going to be in the details. So right now, there is some talk, given some of the, shall we call it, shifting sands of Washington, D.C., that maybe the rail title won't be included in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization. Well, if that happens, there'll be no funding for the rail title. So that can't happen. Uh, there is also, on the alternative, better case, some very expansive thinking given strong Republican support of long distance trains. So there are going to be some proposals that contemplate reducing or even eliminating a match requirement on the development of long distance services. This is all open play, and it's anybody's call at this point as to how this comes to pass. The good news is that, as I said before, there's a ton of bipartisan support. But right now, instead of at the state level, the most important aspects of this that are going to frame this for us are going to be at the federal level. And so I would argue that the most effective advocacy for any passenger rail corridor might be full explication of the long-range plan for Amtrak Cascades to something, a project like this. It's all going to be ensuring that the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed under the previous presidential administration is the baseline for development of passenger rail services in the reauthorization. And there's a strong chance that it will be. There is tremendous industry support for expanded funding of a lot of the programs in that bill, especially a grant program I didn't mention on that slide, which is CRISI, which is Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Investment Funding. And that also includes passenger rail. It's a great source for it, and it's possible that that program will be expanded, and we could use that too. But the fact of the matter is that's where the fight's going to go down. The Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority is in the thick of developing some policy briefs about aspects that are being brought forth by partner organizations, also vying for uh, good paths for passenger rail going into the future. Organizations as diverse as States for Passenger Rail to the Passenger Rail Association to the to even the Commuter Rail Coalition is even developing some useful language that I think BSPRA may tap. But watch for that because I think that that's going to help shape the kind of asks that we're going to need. Also, on the subject of federal level, I might share that in a recent meeting with Senator Murray's staff, they were asked about what they thought about the Big Sky Passenger Rail Corridor and what they were hearing from constituents. And Murray's staffers said quite blankly, nothing. Um, and so I think that there's talk at the state level about this, but I think at the federal level, perhaps there is a void, and that needs to be more consistent along the route. So there can be some federal representation. No matter what happens with the individual DOTs, and goodness, we're working with a lot of them right now. It's really going to be dictated by what the federal programming looks like after the Surface Transportation Reauthorization passes. And I see Dan Bucks has raised his hand. Would you like to fall in here, Dan?
Yes, yes, thanks. I just would like to note, and I'm responding. I'm looking at the chat box at the same time, Abe, and there is a question here from Bill Moyer regarding there's kind of confusion over this a quarter ID match issue. And that's because we think that the matter has been confused from the beginning. As it currently stands, there is a 10% match for the step two and a 20% match for step three in this corridor ID planning process. That was a surprise in the original NOFO for the corridor ID program. That was not decided by the law. That is not the law. That was not decided by rule. It was simply written into the NOFO. And with regard to our position is that with regard to long distance routes, that was erroneously decided administratively without any policymaking process or public participation. And yet, that is the requirement at the present time. So yes, we are busily going about the task of raising the 10% match for step two. At the same time, we are working vigorously to eliminate the requirement for that match. So yes, we had initial discussions with state legislatures about this, and we are engaging in a process of identifying philanthropic sources. But ultimately, we believe that match requirement should be eliminated. That will be one of the items that we would have in our recommendations for the Surface Transportation Act. And if we're not successful on that, we will continue to try to raise the match. The reality is that the long distance service has always been a federal responsibility, and it's unreasonable to expect that the long distance along an extensive multi-state long distance route bear that batch requirement. It is a major challenge. Now we'll try to meet it. But number two, the there are two other long distance routes. We are in the corridor ID program. Our route is the only renewed service route in the new service route in the corridor ID program. The
Well,
other
not,
two,
that's not quite true. It's the only renewed long distance route. There are
only
some portions.
renewed, yeah, right, renewed. I meant, thank you. I meant to say long distance. Yes, is the only new long distance service route in the program. The other two long distance routes are frequency increases on two existing uh, uh, Amtrak routes, going from 3 days weekly to daily service. Now, there is in effect no federal match requirement for those two routes because the money comes through Amtrak and whatever they take from their operating budget for the purposes of planning those routes, that frequency increase will only increase their operating subsidy from Congress. So they're matching federal dollars with federal dollars for those routes. And we think it is absolutely unequal treatment to place the match requirement on our routes. But we have that requirement, so we've had to go out and try to fulfill it. But we want to eliminate that match requirement. Is that, Bill, does that cover your question?
Yes, that is a far clearer way to explain and update us in regards to strategy and what and the difference between what we heard and we're working on a couple of months ago and what's currently happening. And I thank you for the clarity. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, yeah. We have to deal with both eventualities, and we may have a match requirement, but we think the requirement should be limited. We also believe that corridor ID, that within the surface authorization program, that long distance funding ought to be assured of its own funding stream because these routes are uh, we we know something about the challenge of initiating a long distance process and carrying it out. And it needs its own guaranteed funding source to be for long distance route planning and implementation to be effective. We want to make sure the rail title is there, the corridor ID is there, and that the long distance routes are given their own line of funding free of match requirements. That's our general aspirations. We will have a policy brief with more details in the near future and would ask for your vigorous support of that because all that we're talking about in terms of potential routes, et cetera, and service levels is all for naught if we don't succeed in this authorization process, reauthorization process.
And to build on what you just said, Dan, I think that it's great because the Federal Railroad Administration's long distance plan uh, that they just submitted to Congress this year, I think offers a great framework, and so policy language can tie really neatly into that. Um, and I think generally so much of this can be also summarized in a forthcoming policy brief, and we'll make sure to distribute that to this meeting. I want to briefly move in to one more issue, and I keep on emphasizing the federal side of things, but I feel the need to broach something that actually is a local issue at the state level. Um, Part of the step one work is a facilitation of what is going to become a much larger organization in step two. Right now, it's just the skeleton of advisory outreach across the 8 states that we're contemplating, right? And the way that this has been formulated has been in a uniform approach, which is not ideal. It's a necessity because each entity, each tribe, and each state has to be treated in an equitable fashion. But this is dealing with a lot of different variables. For instance, some states have a rail office. Other states have a quarter or maybe half a full-time equivalent employee in their DOT dealing with rail issues. And so the structure of it right now is quite skeletal. Because again, outreach to these organizations on the part of the authority has to be equitable and nobody can get something that somebody else doesn't have or vice versa. It's asking a uh, pretty simple and small ask, which is 2 people from each state and relevant tribe. From the state level, it's one from the Department of Transportation and one, crucially, from outside of the Department of Transportation at another agency of their choice. And this is to highlight 2 aspects, really. The first was the fact that Department of Transportation oftentimes only has one rail person, especially when you go to states like Idaho, for instance. Uh, but crucially, this is also to reflect the fact that this is not simply a transportation project. We're really hoping to see are people from tourism boards, people from economic development agencies, a lot of the direct recipients of the service where it can be exploited to its fullest potential. Right now, letters have been sent out to tribes as well as to gubernatorial offices for nominations to be admitted to this, again, skeleton of a council. Because the way that it's going to work is at the beginning of step two, we'll at least have the beginnings of a corridor-wide communication network that can then grow to suit the need. Because it's not going to stop. There are so many MPOs and other smaller organizations that will need representation. But right now, at this scale, where we're trying to stretch a grant that is of the same size as a corridor that is one tiny fraction of the length of this one, we are soliciting for names that can be in the right place to begin to make those connections at the beginning of step two. And so Ferguson's office actually has a copy of this right now, and we're hoping that maybe some facilitation can happen so names can be uh, uh, proffered later this summer. But right now there has been a lack of response, at least from this state, which is not unusual. I should note that the bipartisan support for this project that I referenced earlier is of an unusual nature. Um, and yes, Tim, looking at your question in the comment, it absolutely could be from any one of those organizations that you cite there. It's open-ended. It's just two people at this point. Um, I think it's very interesting to note that in the original application for the corridor ID process, you had support from the congressional delegations of almost every state on the route, save for Oregon and Washington, which is fascinating when you look at the political makeup of those other states. I should also mention, and it may not be widespread knowledge in this part of the route, but we lost a Democratic senator in Montana. Senator Tester has been swept out by Sheehy, a new senator who is within the dominant party. But interestingly, Sheehy is a very ardent supporter of this corridor. And so the support might surprise you as you look throughout it. But we've always been, there's been a disconnect on the West Coast that I think needs to be worked on in terms of communication, both to the federal delegation uh, as well as local concerns. So I see Luis has his hand up as well.
Yes, just a little clarification on the last point about uh, the lack of support in Oregon and Washington. And earlier, you had pointed out that Senator Murray's office said they weren't hearing anything. So, and I think that was meant from us, although I will dispute that. But
I'm not sure. I think it might be from people along the corridor. It could be, I wouldn't take it personally. I think it's just it was that staffer responding that they hadn't heard from any constituent.
yeah, I'm not,
Yeah.
we're not taking it personally, but I have heard it through another source also. I'm just saying, trying to tie that to them. If the other states are paying attention, then wouldn't you think that Oregon and Washington would somehow be in the same loop that the others got the information from? Maybe there's no answer to that right now, but it's something that we need to address.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah. This is me also acting as messenger because I wasn't the one that was in the meeting with Senator Murray's staff either. I should hasten to clarify. But just so you know, I'm not going to beat you over the head with any more slides. That's it. But we have a half an hour left in the meeting. And that's interesting. Thank you, Harvey, for that comment. Um, we have a half an hour left in the meeting, and I'd like to go ahead and address some more comments in the chat box here. I'll kind of go through them, but also we can open the floor at this point to other general questions before we jump into maybe a couple of pointed questions about next steps.
Let me, Abe, I'd like to point out that another aspect of the participation that we are trying to secure in this process is from the local level. We have created a government partners program. We are not funded for that through through any of the grant process. It's not covered. So we are asking for what we think are modest fees just for the basic administration of the program. We hope to also work that into philanthropic funding. But we have a government partners program that is focused on cities, counties, urban transit systems, and MPOs along the route. And we will have we're planning an upcoming webinar on station development, and we will have an in-person meeting at our annual conference on September 8th to the 10th in Livingston, Montana. The One of the strategies here is to start having local governments prepare plans for train station development, transit-oriented development around those stations, and critically, connecting services to communities uh, either off of the route or other communities or destinations off of the route, or to smaller communities along the route that don't have a train station, or for overlaying additional frequencies on top of the route, additional frequencies as a commuter rail line that would be funded under a means other than the long distance route. Um, and the purpose of this is that we view this corridor as not just a passenger service, but as a corridor of opportunity. And we would hope that the maps end up extending to being a broad highlighted corridor that covers the extent of connecting services that go out 90 out on the prairies, 90 to 100 miles away, in the mountains, maybe a bit closer from the route, and that we want to foster that. Now, one of the best ways to move the route along, and particularly route alternatives, is to start planning those local facilities, the train stations, and the potential connecting services. Now, how do you develop a train station if you don't know if you're going to be on the route or if you're going to be selected on the route? Well, we've actually have developed ideas for strategies where you begin to develop a train station to serve other community needs and adapt it in the future once you know it will be a train station. And there are ways to do this. And that's one of the best ways to advance some portions of this particular project. So we urge participation in that government partners program from along the entire route. And we also will hope to have that government partners members interfacing with that intergovernmental council in terms of being a source for funneling information from the local level to the intergovernmental council, among the other means and avenues of communication. There will always be multiple ways of getting one's messages across in this process.
Say, Abe,
Yes.
a couple comments. First, as we all know, the Class 1 railroads are mega corporations and they respond to incentives and disincentives like any other corporation. One of their problems is securing capital. And that's where, as passenger rail people, we also strongly support the freight railroad system. And I want to suggest that in the case of, like Dan was talking about, what's going to be the route, I think we should incentivize this process somehow by suggesting public private partnerships. For example, expanding the Stampede Tunnel and double tracking the main line between Pasco and Spokane. That would uh, that would be a quantum leap as far as BNSF were concerned, as far as how they would use those tracks. And I think we should support those kind of things when we're suggesting this route that we're not hostile to the freight railroads at all. And we want to see them prosper and thrive because everybody benefits, including the obscure aspect of national defense, which nobody talks about. Anyway, the other thing is a minor technical point. The line we're seeking to reinstate was the Northern Pacific's North Coast Limited, and the documents all refer to North Coast Hiawatha, which I think was a something Amtrak came up with, and the train no longer runs. Anyway, it's in the Midwest. So I would suggest that we call it the way it originally was, and that route never went between Spokane and Seattle. It went down through the Tri-Cities and Yakima Valley and so forth. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. Thanks for hosting this, and I can imagine Secretary Duffy having a brain meltdown after he would look at your slides, because nothing like being confused with the facts.
Well, thank you for the comment. Yes, no, the Amtrak, unfortunately, even digging back into 20th century Amtrak history is kind of a far way to go for the Federal Railroad Administration presently. So we actually did submit some route considerations from the original uh, Northern Pacific network, which of course is, Stampede Pass. But I we had to focus more on the Amtrak era, just to briefly go there, which was a strange amalgamation of historic routes, as they often were. Happy to talk in a sidebar about that anytime. For the first point, you're completely correct. The Perhaps the most crucial stakeholder in all of this is the railroad, and to what degree of comfort it will have with all of our machinations. Because yes, they're multi-billion-dollar corporations, but they're also um, massive landholders, and they're very careful about how they guard their assets. I think that the you're on the right track entirely about thinking about it cooperatively, because it isn't just in the Pasco area, which we do know entails some congestion on the Stampede Pass alignment in particular. There's a lot of discussion around the tunnel, but one thing I'm particularly concerned about is actually not the pass itself at all, or even the really beautiful and slow track just to the east of the tunnel, but it's really the connection between Auburn and Seattle. Given the concurrent service development plan for the Cascades, as well as potential plans from Sound Transit looking at the same route, it's going to be an intense piece of railroad, and we're going to have to thread our service through that. So I see Tom White's hand is up.
Yeah, the strategy behind the success of the original success of the Cascades and the success of uh, the Sounder service, both of which I developed, was to consider it not freight, not passenger, a screwed up railroad and fix all of it.
Hmm.
BN could not today operate their traffic without those two passenger services. And that basically is the approach that is needed is to turn around well, you're hurting us to uh, let's look at all the problems and fix all of them.
Absolutely. And that's going to be no more true than on the former Montana Rail Link in the center and heart of the route.
Yeah, but that's Montana Rail Link is basically a turkey trail.
Yep.
Actually, when I started working on system-wide service planning and capacity for BN, we had a system-wide dispatchers meeting, and I came to find out that all of us from every office on that route between Sandpoint and all the way to Fort Worth referred to it as the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
That is definitely an emblematic of 20th century railroad humor, I would say. But yes,
And none
I'm
of
not
us
surprised
knew
to hear
that the
that.
other,
Yeah.
yeah, and none of us knew the other offices were referring to it. We all used the name independently and found out we were all calling it the same thing.
Which has some interesting implications for us today, where it was managed by a short line for so long. And yeah, I'm completely. First of all, I applaud your work on building the system that we have today. But also, I would stress that that's very much my attitude when I look at a class from railroad and its assets. It's about strengthening the entire rail network for both freight and passenger. And less said the better
Yeah.
In a public forum. But I'm also happy to sidebar anytime.
Well,
So
and in the background, I predate freight railroads. So I came
yeah,
from
no,
a,
back when they were simply railroads. Yeah, we probably should call them private railroads and not freight railroads, and that distinction probably hurts us. You're right.
yeah, it actually does. And
Yeah,
back then we did it all.
yeah,
So
and
it's obvious it can all be done.
and there are places where they still do it all, far more than they do out here right now. So
Right.
I'm with you. So I see RV Morris's hand is up, and if you're talking RVA, you're on mute.
Hi, thank you for this really interesting presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the current expertise in the business. You mentioned at the very beginning that there are all these different consulting groups that you felt had really great expertise, but there's also concern among advocates that the quality of the training has degraded over the years, and it's something that very much the freight railroads control in terms of training people uh, and and maybe also talk a little bit about more ownership and management models for the railroad. I mean, are we up to the task? You mentioned that Auburn to Seattle is going to be really intense. Do we have the kind of people who can really design it um, at this
That's
point?
a great question. So I think that we're talking about a lot of issues in that question. One of the big things is I think that there's a crucial distinction between uh, planning and uh, planning and engineering expertise as opposed to operational expertise, right? And that's, I think, where some of the training comment is maybe we're because we're firmly in a planning exercise at the moment, planning and negotiations and operations modeling exercise is where we're headed. For the to that end, I've got a great degree of confidence, mainly because I'm one of the younger people on the team. I've been in the industry for about 13 years, but I'm really grateful to be backed up at David Evans by Jeff Schultz, who actually worked with Tom White on the original Cascades service development plan. The people at Quandel we work with have been instrumental in every service expansion realized in the Midwest. I think that right now, our team represents some of the best in the industry in terms of what it takes to work with host railroads and achieve outcomes. I've also, full disclosure, I mean, I've worked with, I think it's, well, sometimes it's hard to get for and against, but I've worked directly with three of the now six major Class 1 railroads. So, I mean, we have some background there. Um, in terms of the Auburn example, I think that it's valuable to know that there is potentially an exemplar even on BNSF's own system. And I point you to looking at the what they call the BNSF line on the Metro commuter rail system between Chicago and Aurora, Illinois. That is a, they have publicly invested in that line since the early 1970s. And it is it's a lot of railroad. It's triple track the entire way, and a lot of universal crossovers. But what that means is they can facilitate what is an astonishing amount of passenger trains and a lot of freight every day. And by astonishing amounts, I mean like being able, Metro calling up a couple of months in advance and arranging for BNSF to intensify rush hour services at every 15 minutes, things like that that they've been able to do in the past and be flexible with their service plans. Unlike out here, where even just getting game day trains on the Sounder service can be really pulling teeth. So I think that there are examples both of what our major host railroad, BNSF, does today elsewhere on its network that we can point to, places where they pull this kind of thing off right now, even if they aren't in this division. And then our consulting team, uh, I like to think we won the contract because we made the case that across the two major firms and two other firms that form the team, that we have a deep bench to be able to deal with myriad issues that this comes up with. Because, of course, while I think about railroad problems all the time, there are many other issues that have to be addressed. Things like more like very sensitive outreach issues, sensitive community planning issues, things that stretch beyond the railroad right of way. So.
Abe, so that you don't have to toot your own horn, okay? I'd like to jump in on this. That great question. But we selected the team that we selected for Corridor ID, the Big Sky Passenger, and I was on the selection team. We selected this team because they They cover the entire route with detailed expertise. And they have the three firms, amongst those three firms, they have been involved directly with the development of every single passenger rail improvement in the greater Northwest region, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Pacific coast in the last 20 years, including stretching it down to Colorado as well. Every single there haven't been enough passenger rail projects, but they have been together. This team has been involved in every one of the success stories that have occurred in the last 2 decades with regard to passenger rail. So they know the territory, and they also know everything that has happened in this region and that. So they're established expertise with the only success stories that have occurred in the last 20 years. One of the firms in the middle area is especially gifted in the community engagement with local communities and tribal governments, and that is another important requirement. The fourth firm is the Steer Group, which is the preeminent uh, modeling, benefit cost, and modeling company and ridership and revenue projection firm, economic analysis firm in the passenger rail business. They do the work for Amtrak and are thoroughly acquainted with the Amtrak modeling procedures because they invented the model for Amtrak. So we've got whatever expertise there is in passenger rail, current expertise is represented on this team for this project. We, and it's an outstanding team by blend, and they know it's just really kind of incredible. And we have a great deal of confidence in this team, and and in Abe as the leader of it. So just to
Say, Abe,
So I actually, thank you so much for that, Dan. There are a couple of questions in the comments I'd like to address. But John, did you? But please go for it, John. I just want to make sure we have time.
okay.
Did you? I can say okay. So Luis, state DOT involvement at this time. So in the last 4 months, we've met with every DOT directly on the route, except for the Illinois Department of Transportation, which we've had indirect communication with back and forth. We did a we have met with every single one. We have briefed them on the need to set up the Intergovernmental Council, and we let them know that that was going to the gubernatorial offices in their states. So they have received separate, not only have we met with them all, but they have also received separate letters in advance of the letters that went to the governors. And this is all within the last 4 months or so. Now, Gary, your question about the $11 million we think will be required because, again, FRA is reviewing the budget right now and they may amend it. So that's not a firm number. I just want to emphasize that. Um, Coming up with a formula to get every DOT along the way is part of the reason why long distance trains are a federal responsibility. Because if you look into the mechanics of passenger rail that crosses state lines, I mean, even just two states, even just Washington and Oregon, have had difficulty managing their shared corridor together and coming up with effective cost sharing. So I think that right now um, we have talked about the overall scope and how much it will take. DOTs at this level, I think the way I want to answer this question is the fact that they are aware of the need. None of them, with the exception of North Dakota just recently, and that was their legislature and not their DOT, have the funding available to do this. And this is because really the same reason that PREA 209, and that is just to get out of federal speak, that is the exact code that delineates long distance trains from state supported routes. So every route of under 750 miles has to be covered by the states that they run through. You haven't seen a great deal of corridor growth under PREA 209. And that's because states simply don't have the funding to support them outside of the states that already do. So, you have a lot of corridors in California. You have our corridor here in the Northwest. You have corridors in the Midwest. But beyond that, it's been very skeletal growth. And in fact, we've seen the system atrophy under this policy because getting state TOTs, which were all founded essentially to build roads when you go far enough back, they're not really geared up for this. Now, a lot of them have done a valiant job, and there's a lot of really interesting work that has happened to sustain the corridors that exist right now. But given that framework, while the DOTs are aware of the obligation along the corridor, I think that if we see state involvement in this to generate the match, most likely it will be through the legislatures and not the DOTs themselves asking for it, which is how it worked. I mean, Kim Whitmore in an earlier comment mentioned the fact that the North Dakota DOT, that the North Dakota state legislature allocated $150,000 as direct match for the corridor. They were the first state to chip in. And that came through the legislature and not its DOT. And I think that's the way it's going to work if it's at the state level.
Right.
So we have consulted with them. They're aware of it. They were all very upfront that they, do not have the budget right now at the DOT level to support and facilitate the effort, which is partially uh, why the approach is at the federal level right now and not focusing more on the states and certainly not within the DOTs within each of those states, even though we are continuing to dialogue with them and we're keeping in touch with them. As I said, we have met with six of the seven thus far in person and have all their contact information and are keeping in touch. The fact of the matter is, when we met with them, we haven't had much in terms of substantive updates because we gave them a smaller version of the brief that you've all gotten today because it really regarded the fact that we had submitted a statement of work and the FRA had it under review and we had an idea about what the cost would be. So I hope that answers your question, and I'm happy as ever to sidebar about that further if you'd like. Yes, you're right, Lael. The steer group did not do a BCA for the East-West service because that was a $250,000 study, and a lot of corners were cut. That's right. Um, and I really vastly appreciate that you requested Washington to fund their portion of the Big Sky project. Well, I think that it's going to take more than one run at that. Um, Yes, and Gary was right that Steer was not required to do a BCA, and they were determining the feasibility of the route. And even for the feasibility of the route, I would say that they didn't have enough money to do a thorough job, especially given how the ridership metrics were inputted. They did the best with what they had. I see Arvia's hand is up again.
Yeah, so thank you for all of this again. And what we've sort of observed with our legislature is that, and the relationship between WashDOT and the legislature is that, the legislators they look to the agencies for recommendations. So it's sort of like a chicken and the egg. Like if it's not going to come.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's a circular path for sure. Yeah.
So, and then legislators don't really have they can't follow and micromanage what WashDOT does. So even if they get money, who knows how it's spent? It's just really hard to track these things. We put a lot of pressure on their legislators, and I guess you're saying that's the right thing to do.
Right.
But then, how do you do the follow up to make sure something actually happens?
Yes.
Well,
No, those are all that all sounds like the voice of experience to me. Um,
there's
I,
a
uh, I yeah, this is also part of the reason why usually the paradigm shift of a federal program that allows them to look outside of limited state budgets is what changes the perspective usually.
Okay.
Speaking very generally. Yeah.
if I could just comment, there is no uniform experience among the states with regard to rail planning, rail development, etc. Uh, and in our case of outreach, we are outreaching to every state and within every state, and the patterns are different. Some state departments of transportation have virtually no interest or no function with regard to rail. Washington State is different, and Wisconsin is different from the other states. Minnesota has got a reasonably well developed rail function. Other states have no real developed rail function. But in North Dakota, where there is overwhelming local support for renewed service on the southern route through their state, the legislature is very receptive when their DOT has very limited rail functions. So that's and so the story from state to state is different, and we work with each state. And so, for example, we say to you folks, do what works in Washington to make this route work. This new service work for you, and work with all of the above where you can get it, and especially get the message across to your congressional delegation. You have a new congressman from the congressional from the fifth, I think if I'm correct, the fifth district, which is Spokane, Walla Walla, who has a proclaims a strong interest in infrastructure. And Spokane is going to be an extraordinarily important part of this particular route and secure daylight service uh, as a result of this route. And he needs to hear from people. Everyone along any of the routes needs to hear from Washington in terms of the congressional delegation. So we need to it's not either or one. There isn't a template for us to follow in any given
Well, the
state.
FRA is trying, Dan, through the
But
through the Statement of Work framework. They're certainly trying to unify this, but
yeah, we are trying around the project. We are. Yes, I agree. But where we're
yeah.
starting from is different in each
I
state.
hate to cut you off. We've got 2 minutes left, and I think John McIntosh had another question potentially.
Yeah, just a brief comment on track. I actually drove part of the Stampede line yesterday between uh, Prosser and Toppenish, and that track is straight arrow. That's a 90-mile-an-hour track if it was upgraded. The thing is unlike perhaps Montana Rail Link, BNSF took that line back and about 25 years ago spent $130 million upgrading it. It's in excellent shape. It just needs more signaling and a better tunnel. So on the positive side, um, it's not. I mean, the Stampede Pass line could be reactivated just by money. It's there's nothing overwhelming to prevent that from happening. Just money. Anyway, thanks, Abe.
I appreciate that, John. I agree. It's just, I mean, if you look at some of the things we spend billions of dollars on, really, in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, that sounds good to me. Uh, like I said, so things to look out for coming up next. We've got 1 more minute left scheduled in this, and I don't want to keep anybody over time. Um, my contact information is on this slide. Feel free to ask any questions of me, and I will pass it to the right person if I can't answer the question for you. But things to keep in mind going forward is the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority is developing a policy brief for the federal level, and you cannot underestimate the importance of outreach at the federal level, especially right now, where I think that our program hangs in the balance. And I think there's a really good chance that we could actually come out of this with some good outcomes, which seems incredible given other indicators that we're seeing right now. But um, this program has a lot of bipartisan support. Further down the line, there were the aforementioned local Northwestern Rail Summits, and I think that information is going to be distributed to this group subsequently. The comments for this group were handy, especially Luis reaching out to an overall legislative advocacy work group. And so the contact information that needs to be seen there is Luis Moscoso, who's spoken up a couple of times, as well as Kim Whitmore, who is a very dedicated and busy volunteer for the authority. I just copied their I just copied their contact information to the bottom of this chat box, and I I see Gary Wood's comment about the fact that they ran superliners through Stampede, following up with Tom White's tunnel clearance comment. We'll wait for step two for those conversations. Um, but apart from that, I think that um, if there's unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I
Well,
hope this has been
Abe,
educational and yeah,
I have one more thing.
okay.
We appreciate everybody's participation here and that and greatly. But ultimately, we view this project not as a train project, not as a matter of tracks and tunnels and train sets. We view this as the largest single economic and community development, and I would say sustainable development uh, uh, project in the nation in the last half century. It will serve 25 million people, 21 metropolitan areas, hundreds of other uh, smaller communities, and up to 40 tribal nations if we had all of the alternate routes covered. And this is a tremendous undertaking. And we need to start reaching out beyond making the case federally, having good language in the reauthorization bill, building, if we have to secure the match, working together to secure the match for this route, and reaching out to the healthcare industry, to the education and cultural resources industry, to the conservation groups, to the and to the uh, and to the economic and community development people to help us with documenting the potential benefits of of this renewed passenger service. This service will bring hope, imagination, enterprise, and opportunity to millions of people. And it is the largest project of its kind in this nation in over 50 years. And we welcome your participation and active planning moving forward for it. And we thank you very much for your attention to all of the details. And we appreciate your questions. They are very they are they're outstanding questions and very relevant and on target. And so we appreciate that as well as your time and energy. Thank you.
All right. Well, I hope everybody's taken down the contact information that you need. Again, please feel free to reach out to me with any question. And I think we'll find time to do this again, especially when we have news. So, with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll let Charlie end the meeting.